Welcome to the Prison Professors Podcast. We serve people who face challenges with prosecution, sentencing, and prison. My co-founders are Sean Hopwood and Justin Paperny. My name is Michael Santos. We create digital content and our team offers individual consulting services. We also assist agencies that want to improve outcomes. To learn how we can help you, text the word PrisonPro to 44222. Again, text PrisonPro to 44222 and get our free brochure. You can also visit us at prisonprofessors.com or contact Justin at 818-424-2220. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Send confirmation that you reviewed our podcast and we'll send you a free digital book. Stay tuned for a 20 to 30-minute episode of Prison Professors. Welcome to Prison Professors. I am Michael Santos, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to Jeff Grant. Jeff Grant is a really distinguished guy who really was successful before he went to prison, but when he came back home, he's become, I would argue, even more successful because he's helping people who live in struggle reach their highest potential, and that's why I just feel so honored that he decided to set some time aside and share his story with us. So, Jeff, I want to welcome you to our program. And I would just love it a little bit if you tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure, Michael. First, I want to say thank you. I'm a really big fan of what you and Justin and Sean are doing. So I'm really honored to be on here today. So thank you.
Thank you.
My story is, I guess it's not the typical prison story. I was a lawyer in New York. And I had a sports injury, and I became addicted to prescription narcotics. So I guess I was an early opioid victim because I had a doctor who was prescribing for me. I don't blame him, but I manipulated him certainly into giving me the drugs. And over the next 10 years, I was addicted, running a law firm. Eventually, my decision-making completely deteriorated. And I commingled funds in the law firm and took out a 9/11 loan to save the firm to no avail. In 2002, I'd had enough. I resigned my law license and I tried to kill myself. And that was the end of that life.
Let me just give a little commentary there because a lot of our listeners are going through that period of struggle right now, and they may be in jail, they may be in prison, they may find themselves targeted for a prosecution. And one of the things that I really want to point out that I just learned from Jeff is the incredible humility. There was no, it's not my fault. He quickly said, my fault, I did something wrong. There was no shame in what he did, and you can see that he is still open about it, even though it was in 2002. We're recording this episode in 2018, and he's still willing to talk about it. So he's somebody that can show us, regardless of what bad decisions we've made in the past, we can always move forward, turn a new leaf, build a life of relevance and contribution, and he is truly a role model for that. And I hope that you're getting this same inspiration that I am as I listen to Jeff continue with his story. So tell us a little more. What happened after that, Jeff?
And Michael, just to reflect on what you just said, I mean, it's been a process. I didn't instantly have no shame or guilt. It was something that I had to work myself through, and I worked through living mostly in community and with the help of good people. And it's still a process, on any given day. I could definitely be sad or depressed, but mostly I try to be forward thinking and be in the light and do what's right in front of me. First things first. So thank you for mentioning that.
Walk us through the process and what happened after you faced this challenge.
Sure. After my suicide attempt, I wound up in rehab, and I stayed there for 7 weeks. And then I came out into recovery, and recovery saved my life. I went 3 times a day to meetings for the first 2 years I was in it. And then when I was about 20 months sober, I got a call from the FBI that there was a warrant out for my arrest in connection with misrepresentations I had made on that 9/11 loan. And I was in complete denial. I had no idea that I had done that or I had completely repressed it. But I hired counsel and went down to New York City to then post 9/11 federal building on 500 Pearl Street, which was kind of like entering a war zone for anyone who was in Manhattan back then and remembers. And I turned myself in and got arraigned and then was released. And for the next 2 years, I had to wait to get sentenced, living with it every single day, but doing good works and making my amends and being in recovery. And I would say that the single, at that point, my wife had left or kicked me out. And I would say the single biggest reason that I was successful in terms of my transition, both into prison and then from prison, was the fact that I entered prison sober, almost 4 years sober. And I know that a lot of people don't do that, but for me, it was a game changer.
Can you tell us the mindset that you had, having been a successful lawyer, a well-educated man, going into the prison system? What was the mindset when you went in there?
I knew that I was going to be a relatively short-termer. I wound up being sentenced to 18 months. I served 13 and a half of that in prison. But I knew that from reading that if I was, that I could form my own rehabilitation in prison and I could make it a transformative experience. And I'm not sure when that realization hit me, but it was certainly before prison. So what I started to do was prepare. I mean, I read books about captivity and incarceration. I read Mandela. I read Bonhoeffer. I read Viktor Frankl, Men's Search for Meaning. I read Greek and Norse myths. Anything I could find about incarceration and what it is to have some form of transformative experience. And what I learned before I went in is that even in places of very limited control, like in a prison, we still have control over some things. We have control over our body. We have control over our attitude. We have control over our ability to help others. So with those three things, I went into it with the decision that I was going to come out of this experience different. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what it was going to look like. But I knew that I didn't want to live the same life I had lived before, which was a life of materialism. I mean, I was a hardcore New York lawyer. It was all about the money. And I knew if I went back to that, it would kill me. It almost killed me the first time.
So when you went into the prison system, you said you started at 500 Pearl Street. Were you confined actually at MCC in New York? No,
I wasn't confined up until the day I self-surrendered at Allenwood Low. And what happened was that I got sentenced in early 2016. And then I got designated, and I got designated to a low-security prison. That's not a camp.
Did you say 2016?
I mean, sorry, 2006. Sorry, 2006.
Okay, so you went into the prison in 2006, and you went into a low-security prison rather than a minimum security prison. Exactly. Why was that?
Well, the reason I was told was that they designate by security level, and they designate within wherever there's a bed within 500 miles of where you live. And I was a security level of 0, so I could have been in a camp. But on the particular day I was designated, there were no beds in camps. And so I was bumped up to the next security level, and that happened to be a low. And so when I got the letter in the mail, I mean, I don't know if people get these designations by email or now, but back then it was certainly by letter. And I got the letter, and it said low security, Allenwood low security, and I didn't know what that meant. I went to the computer and I looked it up, and Allenwood used to have a camp there that was Camp Fed. I mean, Allenwood was the camp. It
still does have a camp there.
Oh well, it didn't when I was there,
okay.
And that's where the golf course was and the tennis courts and everything. But they had closed it a year before I got there. Maybe it's reopened. And so I was looking, trying to find it, and it wasn't there. And then the realization happened that I was indeed designated to a low. And when I self-surrendered on Easter Sunday of 2006, I had to go, behind bars and controlled movements and razor wire and dogs and patrolling cars, the whole deal. Yeah.
So for those listeners who don't quite understand the difference, in a minimum security camp, everybody in the camp has a sentence of 10 years or less. So that would mean that the people who are there generally have an attitude that they're really thinking about going home, and there's less volatility in a camp. It's almost like being in an honor system. versus a low security prison, what Jeff is describing, the people have a release date of anywhere within now and the next 20 years. So the mindset can be a little bit different. The volatility level can be a little bit higher. And I'd be very curious to hear about Jeff's experience in living in that type of environment.
Well, it was eye-opening. I mean, what I really didn't know was that everything that we have on the outside, there's something similar, or its counterpart is inside the prison, except you wouldn't know that. So for me, it was like getting on a plane and landing in Mongolia. And when you get there, you don't know the language and you don't have the right money and you don't have anyone to interpret, but still you have to learn to navigate. And that's what happened for me. And every single thing there was eye-opening for me. When I first got there, they put me immediately in the SHU. And for
our listeners don't know what the SHU is, could you describe that for them?
Yeah, it's solitary. And, once I got there, I first was cuffed and brought into R&D, which is receiving and discharge. And they stripped me naked and they took all my clothes, anything I brought. And it was important to note that one of the things I did bring with me were my prescriptions, because I was on, at the time I was on prescriptions for various health issues and including a mental health issue of being bipolar. And so I was on medication for all of that. And we weren't positive going in that they would recognize all of that. And what I had been told in advance was check the formulary, make sure you see what's on the government formulary, adjust your prescriptions months in advance so that you're used to those kind of prescriptions, do it obviously with a psychiatrist or a psychopharmacologist. And I walked in with the prescriptions. And I found that among the things that the federal government does do well, they do many things not so well, but what they do well is they take care of things like prescriptions and they take care of medical things because I guess they don't want to be sued. That would be my guess. But they were very good about that. They stripped me down. And I was there on Easter Sunday, and they were not, so there had been a mistake in my papers. They were not too happy about doing an intake on Easter Sunday. And the person who actually did my intake was the head lieutenant of the compound because there's no other staff there. And I'm standing there naked, and he looked at me, and he said to me, he looked at my file, and then he looked at me, and he said to me, "So you're the lawyer?" And I said, "No, but I used to be." And I didn't know, but that was exactly the right answer. Mm-hmm. You know, it was humble. I wasn't pretending to be anything. And he said to me, "You know, you're a short-termer here. You're only going to be here a little over a year, probably." He goes, and the one thing I want to caution you is don't be doing any legal work for anyone on this compound. Don't be taking anything of value from anybody. Don't accept money. Don't do that. Otherwise, we'll run you into solitary. And I said to him, the last thing in the world that I could even be thinking about was making money from anybody on this compound. Mm-hmm. And that held true. They put an orange jumpsuit on me and then walked me 300 yards to solitary, to the SHU or the SEG, depending on what your nomenclature is. And they stripped me again. They searched me, put me in a rubber room, and then eventually brought me into a little tiny cell that had a bunk bed in it and a sink toilet bubbler and a little desk. And there was another guy in there, and they didn't tell me where I was. They didn't tell me I was in the SHU. I didn't know if I was in SEG. I didn't know if I was in the prison. I had no idea where I was. They weren't giving out any information. I was just left there on my own. And the door opened. I went in the cell. It closed behind me, and that was my introduction to prison.
And how long were you in the segregated housing unit? Just till the following day when the staff came, or were you there for a while?
My roommate there had been there for weeks, and he wasn't. He wasn't really going to talk to me, and I had no information. He wasn't interested in me at all until he heard a rolling cart come down. We heard a rolling cart come down the hallway, and he said to me, he said to me, just do what I tell you. And the little door opened up. In the door, the little counter opened up, and in slid 4 trays of food that if we didn't catch them quickly, they would have dropped to the floor. So he knew to get them, and he handed me each one, and we opened it up, and it was a mess. I couldn't even tell what it was.
It was Easter dinner.
It was Easter dinner, exactly. But it was clear some of it was meat and some of it was starches like rice and bread and potatoes. And I was like feeling nauseated. And I said to him, one of the trays was full of the starches. And I said to him, would you like this? And he looked at me like I was crazy, like I was giving up food. And as soon as I did that, we became friendly right away, like right away it was like, and he let me know that most people who come into the prison come into the solitary, come into the SHU. And what they do is they kind of soothe the savage beast that way. And he said, there's no way to tell how long you'll be in here. He had been in there administratively for something else, who had come off the compound into there. And he said to me flat out, he said, you're an older white guy, you'll probably be out of here in a few hours. And in truth, 16 hours later, I was on the compound.
So what was it? One of the things that I'd like to point out to listeners who don't experience the prison system is Jeff is describing a rather traumatic experience for him. Why? Because he's never been incarcerated before. He has no idea what he's getting into. He's walking into a cell with a stranger that shows no interest in him, but I'm quite sure then we'll ask Jeff what his perceptions of what it was like to be locked inside of a closet-sized room with somebody that you don't know and have no knowledge of how long you're going to be there. But I will say that this is a everyday experience for millions of people in our country. And the reality is if you start in high security and come down lower, you don't have that same level of trauma that somebody who's just going in for the first time. Life is about perceptions. If you're used to something, it's not so traumatizing. But for somebody who's going in for the first day, it truly is. And Jeff, I got to believe that this is probably the first time in your life that you were ever locked in a closet-sized room with a complete stranger, and you said he wasn't interested in you. My question is what emotions or thoughts were going through your mind when they locked that door and you were in there with a stranger?
I mean, the truth is that I wasn't terrorized. On some level, I found it fascinating. That I'd already kind of turned myself over to the fact that this was going to be some kind of roller coaster ride. It was like going to Disneyland and all kinds of things were going to happen. And that the more I suspend judgment as to what's good or bad or whatever, the easier it was likely to be, and the more present I would be. I mean, for me, it was important to be mindful, to actually be there, and to experience whatever I was experiencing, and that had started early. But the things that he was telling me, like, for example, to go to the bathroom, even in that little closet in solitary, to go to the bathroom, there was a protocol that he knew that I knew nothing about, where they would take a sheet off the bed and cut the room in half so that one of us would be on the bedside and the other one would be on the toilet side. And that was just the way it was done. And he was just showing me how we were going to survive together while we were in this little room. And it was my first inkling that there was something going on here that was completely foreign to what I was experiencing. I mean, I didn't feel afraid, but I did have this kind of sense of underlying, there was kind of a sense of terror, but not like overtly afraid, like that my life is in jeopardy.
And then you went onto the compound 16 hours later. Tell us how that changed for you when you're now in the mix of more than 1,000 people that you don't know.
So here's what happened. So 16 hours later, they come to the door, they get me, and I looked at my roommate and I said to him, like, he'd already told me I was going to get out of there early, or he thought I was. And I looked at him and he kind of looked at me and said, like, there's the racial profiling, like he was a black guy. So like he expected to be there for a month, but he expected that I would be out of there in a day. And that wasn't really computing for me at the time, but I've learned that there's a lot of racial profiling in prison. So I was wearing an orange jumpsuit, and they pushed me out onto the compound. And now I remember it was daylight, and I had been in a very dark place, so I was like blinded by the light. And they said to me, "Go to the laundry and go get your stuff." So they just throw me out into the compound, and the compound was closed. And so whatever anyone doesn't understand what that means is that at 10 minutes at the bottom of the hour, every hour they open the compound so you can get from one building to another, you can cross. But in between, nobody's allowed in the compound unless you're working in the compound, like cleaning or something. So they threw me out into this space that was the middle of a prison, but I knew nothing about. And I'm in an orange jumpsuit, and they told me to go to the laundry, but they didn't tell me where the laundry was. So I'm kind of wandering around, and it's a labyrinth of sidewalks, which are kind of intentionally designed to spread the population out because you're not allowed to be on the lawn. And so I'm walking around, and I hear this, I hear this voice come on, which is from a speaker, yelling "inmate," and obviously they were talking to me, or I figured out they were talking to me. And they knew where I was going because I was coming from solitary and I was wearing an orange jumpsuit. And they said, go to the laundry. And I didn't know who I was talking to. I just yelled up. I said, "I don't know where that is." And they kind of gave me directions, and it was like all the way across the compound. And I walked all the way across the compound, and lo and behold, there was a sign on the side of this building that said laundry. And I didn't know what to do. I was standing out there, and I rapped on the door because it was this big metal door, and I rapped on the door, and the door opened about this wide, and a little face came out and said, "Come back at the move." And the door shut. And I didn't know what the move was. So I was just standing out there, and I didn't know whether I should knock on the door again. I didn't know what to do. And I would say about 5 or 10 minutes later, siren went off, and all of a sudden the doors opened everywhere, and people started scurrying all over the place. And I realized that was the move. And although I knew nothing about it, and I went inside, and they sized me up, and they gave me a uniform, and they gave me T-shirts, and they gave me shoes, and they gave me a toiletry kit and towels and things like that. And then they said to me, on the next move, go to your unit. And on the next move, I walked to my unit, and I walked inside, and there was a guard station there. And they knew, because I was carrying a duffel bag worth of stuff, they knew I was a new guy, and they took my, and I had my ID that I had gotten in laundry, and they took my ID, and they said to me, you're in cube 25, and they showed me there was a big barrack where on each side of it, 180 guys lived in these cubicles like the ones you see on Orange Is the New Black. And I went to cube 25, and I was upper bunk, three people in that cube, and that's where I lived for the next 13 and a half months.
And if you're looking back right now and assess that 13-month adjustment, could you tell us what worked for you and what didn't work for you? What worked for you in your adjustment? You look back right now and said, I did these things well, and it really helped me, my mindset while I was in prison, and perhaps put me on a position for success when I get out.
There were a couple of seminal things. I mean, there were a lot of difficulties, and I'll come back to those. The first was that after a couple of days, I got a call out to go to the psychology building. And for those who haven't been through this yet, a call out is there's a sheet that's posted in the front of the unit every night that tells everyone by your register number where you're supposed to be the next day. And believe me, when you first get there, it's completely confusing. And I needed a lot of help. And they give you 2 or 3 weeks of grace to try to figure it all out. So, but after that, if you're not where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, the you go to the head lieutenant's office or the captain's office, and they could throw you back in the shoe. But now they gave me a call out to the psychology building, and on the move, I went across at the time I was supposed to go. And I waited, I checked in, and I waited to see the psychologist. And I sat down, and the psychologist said to me, among other things, he said, so what do you want to do while you're here? And I said, well, I thought, I've been a lawyer, and I thought I could help people. So he said, and I was probably 50 pounds overweight at that point. And he said to me, and I said, I was told maybe I should work in the education building. I should help other inmates get GEDs or help them with some kind of learning. And he looked at me and he said to me, that's kind of what you were doing on the outside. You were sitting at a desk, and you're kind of indoors, and you obviously, got out of shape. He said, have you ever thought about doing something completely different during your year or so here that you weren't doing on the outside? And I said, like what? And he said, why don't you think about getting a job at recreation, at the rec? And you could be outside, you could spend most of your time exercising, walking the track, doing that, and you can actually get yourself in shape. And it's completely different coping mechanism than the way that you've treated yourself probably for the last 20 or 30 years. And it just, it was like an aha moment. I said, sure, that sounds like a great idea. And so he gave me a pass, and at some point in the next day, I went up to rec, and I introduced myself to the guard there, who was essentially the coach. He wasn't dressed in guard clothes. He was dressed in rec clothes. He kind of looked like Ken Howard from The White Shadow. He was wearing like ripstop stuff. And I tried to introduce myself, and I'm sure that my pitch to him to get the job was right out of the Shawshank Redemption. I was like telling him how smart I was and all this stuff. And he just looked at me and he said to me, all right, you're hired. And he gave me the responsibility for emptying some trash cans. And so now I'm up in rec for the 3 hours or 3.5 hours every morning where I work there. And I was going to wind up in rec in the afternoons or in the evenings as well. And I decided what I was going to do is start walking the track. And I wound up walking 14,000 laps around the track at a quarter mile apiece. That was 3,500 miles. And over that year, I walked the equivalent of walking from New York to Los Angeles.
Well, that's quite a goal to achieve. And I take it you must have lost some of that 50 pounds that you were carrying when you went in there.
I lost more than that. I came out thin.
Well, that's an inspiring message for people who think that they may be going into prison and find that it's just a total waste of time. Really what happens is I think it's the mindset that you carry when you went in there. And we heard from Jeff Grant how he prepared himself before he ever surrendered by reading books, by getting his mind right, and first and foremost, by making sure that he went in there sober. And it made all the difference during his journey. There's a lot more that I'd like to hear from Jeff Grant, but we've run out of time on this episode. I'm going to ask him, do you have enough time to stay with us for a second episode, Jeff?
I do.
Okay, so what we're going to do is break here, and we will be back tomorrow with continuing the story of Jeff Grant. I'd really like to hear in tomorrow's episode is he'd mentioned that there were some challenges that he faced during that 13 months. I'd like to hear about that. But more importantly, I'd like to focus a lot on what he has been doing since he came home, because Jeff is now working with a nonprofit that I'd like him just to give us a little snippet about it, what it is, so that people will know what's coming tomorrow. Sure.
It's Family ReEntry in Connecticut, where we serve the criminal justice community in 8 cities in Connecticut. And I am the executive director. So I'm the CEO. Well, we have about 100 employees, and I'm the first person in the country who's been incarcerated for white-collar crime to be appointed as the executive director of a major criminal justice organization. So I'm honored and proud of that. But mostly, I think that it's important for your listeners to know that it can be done, that there's hope out there.
And the people that you serve, I presume, are not just white-collar offenders. Tell us a little bit about the people that you serve.
No, this is fundamentally an inner-city project. We're in 10 inner cities in Connecticut, and we have the largest domestic violence programs, amount of programs in the state. So those are government contracts. We have reentry programs. We have residential reentry. We have some youth and family programs. We do have a white-collar ministry on the side that you know about, that my wife and I do in Greenwich. But in these inner cities in Bridgeport, New Haven, Stamford, they need support, and we're honored to be able to do that for them.
Well, we look forward to hearing about that in tomorrow's episode. I am Michael with prisonprofessors.com, and we want to thank you for tuning into this episode with Jeff Grant, who is showing us that regardless of what challenges you faced in the past, you can always move forward toward a more productive, successful life. And if you'd like to hear a little bit more about the different ways that we help, please subscribe to iTunes, to the Prison Professors podcast on iTunes. It's free. And we'd love it if you could rate the show and review the show so that we can get more distributions. If you'd like a little bit more information on our organization, visit prisonprofessors.com or text the word Prison Pro to 44222. That's text Prison Pro to 44222. We love giving information away that will help people make decisions so they can come out like Jeff Grant. We'll be back tomorrow with another inspiring episode from Jeff Grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.